Pre-draft visits can usually tell us a lot about where Brian Gutekunst is looking in the draft, but this year he's been particularly cagey so far.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. We hope you like starting your day with us as much as we like starting our day with you here on the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. We are going to talk about fixing the mistakes of the 2022 draft, which we did in free agency, but I think the question is, are they fixed through free agency? Have they done enough? And do they still have to go further? I want to talk about some big free agency misses that the Packers have had over the years, because John Eric Sullivan was in the news recently talking about one of them. But let's start with the pre-draft visits, because Brian Gutekunst has had a very bad poker face when it comes to these things. And I know that fans like to think, oh, you know, they'll do misdirects and they're bringing in someone just to throw you off the scent. No, they're not. No, they're not. No, they're not. And if you look at the 2025 class, who did they have more pre-draft visits with than any other position? Receiver. They took 2. Let's just go through. They had a pre-draft visit with Taylor Elgersma, who ended up being in training camp. They met with Matthew Golden and Savion Williams, in addition to Tet McMillan and Emeka Ibuka. The combination of McMillan, Golden, and Ibuka told us they are looking at the top of this draft. And then again, at the end of day 2, Isaiah Bond from Texas, Savion Williams from TCU, Torrey Horton from Colorado State, and Ty Felton from Maryland were all seen as late 3, early 4th type players. That's where they went. And that's where the Packers drafted these guys. They also had Anthony Belton in for a pre-draft visit. They had a bunch of pass rushers in for a pre-draft visit. They didn't take any of them. Now they had Michael Williams, Shamar Stewart, James Pierce. Those guys all end up coming off the board before they get a chance to take them. But they do take Baron Sorrell at the top of day 3. And then they look at some cornerbacks at the end of round 1, early round 2, but they also brought in Micah Robinson, who ended up being part of their draft class. So that's like more than half of their draft class were guys that came in on visits, and we were able to see, okay, they're looking at a lot of receivers, a lot of offensive linemen, a lot of pass rushers. We kind of had a feeling about what this was going to be. There is really no through line with these pre-draft visits, except it's mostly UDFA type players. And all of the UDFA type players are freak athletes. Like they're all 9.2 relative athletic score guys or better. Tested outstanding. In the case of like Anthony Smith at Eastern Carolina, he had a college all-star game. Productive, checks all the boxes at receiver for the Packers. And so Jaden Duggar, same thing. He was part of an all-star game. I think it was the Shrine Bowl. Elite athlete. But when you look at the guys on day 2 that they've had visits with, and this is just recorded visits for posterity. We know based on reporting, they've had visits with these guys. There may be more, and there have been unofficial visits, because remember, you don't need an official visit to meet with someone. Chris Johnson, the corner from San Diego State, has said he's had a couple Zoom calls with the Packers. He just hasn't been to Green Bay on an official visit. So Christian Miller from Georgia, we just got the reporting. He has an official visit. Mike Washington Jr., the running back from Arkansas, who we're going to do a Goodies Guys on. We already did a Goodies Guys on Kristen Miller. We already did a Goodies Guys on Ted Hurst, who is also on this list. Mike Washington, and then Caleb Proctor, the defensive tackle from Southeastern Louisiana. The only other guy in the top 100 that they've done a visit with was Romello Height from Texas Tech, who is an intriguing pass rusher, but they haven't really looked at a lot of these other pass rushers. And, you know, if you want to do the subterfuge thing, maybe they bring in Romello Height to ask him about Lee Hunter, to ask him about Jacob Rodriguez, because he could tell you a lot about some of these other guys. That seems like galaxy braining it to me. I think the Packers, because they don't have a first round pick, are just genuinely trying to figure this out, because it is going to be so much harder to game this out for them. Like when you pick at even 29, 30, you know more or less who's going to be there. And I think, in fact, that's probably why sometimes I think the Packers end up reaching at the end of the first round, because they're like, maybe let's fall in love with someone we know is going to be there, so we're not so tempted to trade up, which the Packers have done a bunch, right? They trade up for Jordan Love. They trade up for Darnell Savage. They trade up for Jair Alexander after trading back, but they trade up. So they have a history of trading up in the first round. I don't think it's out of the question that they would trade up in this draft, especially if one of these corners drops. If Brandon Cisse or Chris Johnson falls into the mid 40s, which is not, you know, totally out of the question, but I would be pretty surprised. I think these pass rushers and offensive linemen and receivers are going to push down some of these corners, because it's not a clean cornerback class. We've talked about that. I wrote about it today for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. I just think the Packers are leaving their options open. And I also don't think it's a coincidence that, you know, you look at someone like Ted Hurst. He went to Georgia State. You'd really like, the talent is there. I love Ted Hurst. I think he's a top 50 kind of player. And I think if he had gone to Memphis or Georgia Tech or, you know, even a WAC school, that maybe he goes in the first round. I think that's how talented he is. But you want to get fully comfortable with a player like that. If you're going to use him if you're going to pick him at 52, which would be higher than consensus as of right now, and almost a full round higher than consensus, I would be fine with it. But I think you need to be very comfortable with the person. Caleb Proctor from Southeastern Louisiana. Yeah, the LSU tape is really good, and he dominated his level of competition, but he played at his level of competition. You would want to get really comfortable with the player. His consensus rank is 107. I think he's a top 70 player in this draft. If they took him at 52, I'd be a little surprised, but I would get it. I think I have him as my 60th overall player. He's better to me than Pete Woods, who's going to go in the first round. At worst, is going to go top 40 probably. I think that's insane. Insane. Caleb Proctor is a similar size, a better athlete, and has a more diverse pass rush repertoire already. And they're a pretty similar age. Caleb Proctor is not even 22 yet. If you haven't listened to our Goodies Guys series on Caleb Proctor, go listen to it, because I gushed. And I gushed because I think he's really good. So the Packers, look, it's possible. I had someone float the idea to me on Twitter that, maybe they're doing this because they're keeping their powder dry for a trade, and then they want to focus more on UDFAs. I don't think that's likely. I don't. It was, just a theory. It's not like that's some sourced reporting. That's just a theory. And I mean, it wouldn't be surprising. It has been atypical the way that Brian Gutekunst has operated this pre-draft process with all of these guys who are not even close to the consensus in terms of draftable grades. I mean, Anthony Smith is not even on the consensus. There's 700 guys on the consensus board. He's not on it. Josh Gesky, not on it. TJ Quinn, the linebacker from Louisville, not on it. Jacob Thomas, the safety from James Madison, is 479. So not a draftable player. It's a lot of UDFAs. Jaden Duggar, the linebacker from Louisiana, 311 on the consensus board. That's UDFA scouting. Why are they doing that this year? That was a Ted Thompson thing. Are they just not expecting to have draft picks? Is there some big thing coming? Are they going to make the Dexter Lawrence trade? I don't think so. By the way, we talked to Patricia Traina from Locked On Sports today, or for Locked On Sports today from Locked On Giants. She thinks this is going to get done. She thinks they're going to, get an extension worked out and there's not going to be a trade. So then what are they doing? Are we going to just learn a lot more in the next couple of weeks that they've met with a bunch more players and we're going to get a better feel for this? Maybe. Or the Packers, by virtue of not having a first round pick, are just having to cast a wider net and they're just going to take best player available. The pressure is off a little bit because they don't have a first round pick. I think the pressure is different on a second round pick. And so maybe they're just like, look, we're going to follow the board and take the best guy. And you hope so because, they had some issues in 2022 with BPA and not worrying about positional value. And they're dealing with the consequences now. Have they fixed those issues? We'll talk about it next. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Financial stress is something a lot of people are carrying right now, and it's not just about numbers. It can affect your sleep, your relationships, your overall mental health in ways that build up over time. And the reality is, struggling with money doesn't mean you've failed. Sometimes it just means you haven't had the right kind of support. There is a stress of expectations, of having it all figured out, having it all together, and how that pressure can spill into other areas of your life. This is a person thing. This is something that everyone has to deal with at some point in some way or another. Therapy isn't about financial advice. It's about working through the stress, the anxiety, and the emotions that come with it. With over 30,000 licensed therapists and more than 6 million people served, BetterHelp makes it easier to get matched and start focusing on what you need. When life feels overwhelming, therapy can help. Sign up and get 10% off at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's betterhelp.com/lockedon. Don't forget to check out the Everydayer Club that gives you ad-free episodes of Locked On Packers, plus a link to the group chat with other listeners of the show. And of course, me, I'm there. Tap the link in the show notes or go to lockedonpackers.supercast.com. One of the things that we talked about the free agent group and the needs you had to go out and fill was based on the failings of the 2022 draft. Or at least not the failings, because I think that is too harsh of a phraseology, because Romeo Doubs did not fail as a day 3 pick. In fact, that's a home run day 3 pick. Rasheed Walker did not fail as a day 3 pick. In fact, that was a home run pick. Kingsley Enagbare did not fail. But those players are not on the team anymore. And so you've had to, over the last few years, figure out how to replace those guys. Now, when you have a draft class like 2022 and 2023, they became foundational drafts for the Packers as they make the early stage Jordan Love runs. Now, we've just cycled through 2022. And we came out the other side with Zach Tom, basically. Now, Zach Tom is a Pro Bowl, borderline all-pro level right tackle when he's healthy. And so that's a pretty good player to have. You came out with Sean Ryan, who's a starting center for the Packers. We'll see if that's what he is in terms of quality moving forward. And having 2 offensive line starters and guys that you feel, pretty good about, that's a really good place to be. But, it'd be better if Romeo Doubs had developed into something more. Christian Watson got his 1-year extension. We don't know what his future is going to look like. Are the Packers going to pay him $28, $29, $30 million a year? He's on this team right now, but the Packers have to be thinking about the future. And you have to assume that what they did last year was an eye not just to the future of Romeo Doubs, but of having some insurance for Christian Watson. And we've talked about Christian Watson insurance on our Goodies Guys series in particular. You go out and you have to replace Quay Walker. He leaves, you have to trade for Zaire Franklin. But I think that's a good trade for the Packers. I think that they have upgraded that position. I think they're in good shape there. They gave him money that, not that it precludes them from taking a linebacker, but I think it sets them up where, unless they're just blown away with the value, like someone like Anthony Hill or Jacob Rodriguez, who's like a borderline top 40 kind of player on their board, let's say, is there at 52, and they're like, we can't not take this guy. It's not so much money that you're paying Zaire Franklin that you would make that, unworkable in some way. But they don't have to do anything there. I think they're set at linebacker, at least for a year or two. Now, Devontae Wyatt, who was their next pick, Defensive tackle is still very much a question mark. Like defensive tackle, I think you can make the case is one of their priority needs, even after signing Javon Hargrave. Carl Brooks, last year of his deal. Devontae Wyatt playing on his 5th-year option. There's some major questions about the future of those guys on this team. Defensive tackle is at or near the top of the need list for the Packers. Not hitting on Devontae Wyatt has the trickle-down effect of still being a problem for the Packers in the year of our Lord, 2026. And by the way, this is part of why you don't draft an older prospect in round 1 is, okay, what is he going to be in 3 or 4 years? Well, the answer in the case of Devontae Wyatt is 28. And so like that's not where you want to be giving out a second contract. Now they can use, again, they're going to use their 5th-year option. I find it hard to believe Devontae Wyatt is going to get a contract. I think it's more likely they give Carl Brooks some sort of Dean Lowry light contract and let Devontae Wyatt walk. And, if they want to get some comp picks in there, great. I don't think they're even worried about that. That's why you see Kristen Miller. That's why you see Caleb Proctor. And I know the consensus says Caleb Proctor, 107, whatever. I think at 84, Caleb Proctor, do it. No doubt I would be in for that. And yes, he's similar to Javon Hargrave as a penetrating 3 technique. And yes, he's similar to Devontae Wyatt or Carl Brooks, who are best suited as penetrating 3 techniques. But he is also potentially a core player moving forward at that spot and is under contract at that spot now for 4 years. Whereas Wyatt and Brooks come off the books at the end of this season. That is a major question. Now, Christian Watson, you trade up in the 2nd round. In retrospect, you should have just taken Christian Watson in the 1st round. I said this in real time, you guys. And everyone was very mad at me for the things that I said about Quay Walker and Devontae Wyatt, which have turned out to be pretty true. Okay. Just think it's worth pointing out here how much slack, how much I was dragged for my Quay Walker takes and my Devontae Wyatt takes. And I've been right really all the way through about those guys. Christian Watson as a 1st-round player, you basically get to play him on his 5th round or 5th-year option this year. You gave him that mini extension, probably cheaper, frankly. I haven't looked at the receiver options lately, but this is probably cheaper than his 5th-year option would have been. Or it's right in that range. And I don't know that he's $30 million worth of player. But I think the Packers would want to give him that contract. And I, look, if you could give him the Alec Pierce deal and structure it the way the Packers like to structure it, I kind of think you have to do that. Like if you look at yards per route run over the last couple of years, or no, it's yards per target. Ian Hart has had this. Yards per target, the 2 top guys in yards per target, I think over the last 3 seasons are Alec Pierce and Christian Watson. Now it favors heavily these guys that are downfield, deep ball guys, but those guys are really valuable, especially if you're getting a decent amount of volume. So Christian Watson is one of the preeminent deep threats in the NFL, one of the preeminent deep ball winners in the NFL, big play creators in the NFL, playing in an offense that wants to do that. Kyle Shanahan called it their superpower. Like he loves watching the Packers throw the ball deep because they've got a quarterback that's really good at it. They've got receivers that are good at it. They've got a coach that's really good designing opportunities. So you're in a good shape with Christian Watson. I think they're gonna move forward with him. Sean Ryan, as I said, got his contract, and then they've built an off-ramp for Romeo Doubs, who built himself into a really nice football player. But Matthew Golden, I think, is going to slide right in there. Now, Zach Tom, he's still a core piece. Sean Ryan, they're paying him now like a core piece of this team. And so 2022 remains a foundational draft for this team. There are two pieces of their starting offensive line that are now under contract for the next 3 years. Came from that draft. If Christian Watson gets an extension, that is an essential piece of your offense. And you got 5 years out of your defensive tackle pass rusher guy. It's a pretty good draft. It's not as good as it seemed at the time in terms of the foundational nature of it. The 2023 draft is looking very much the same. That looked like it could be one of the drafts. Like, oh man, if Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks and Carl Brooks keep looking like this, the way they looked in 2023, and then the upward trajectory it seemed like in 2024, like, oh wow, this is going to be special. And it hasn't quite come together that way. And we could be sitting here in a year going, if 2023 that draft had gone a little bit better, if they take Jackson Smith-Njigba instead of Lucas Van Ness, do they have a Super Bowl trophy already? And, if you're a Packers fan, you're hoping, okay, the conversation is actually, would they have hoisted it the year before instead of the year after? Could they have gone back to back with Jackson Smith-Njigba? That would be the more fun conversation to be having. I guess we'll see. I want to talk about free agency and the rewriting of history that tends to happen with these guys. We'll talk about it next. When a free agent leaves and goes on to have success, what often happens is fans, and this is not unique to Packers fans, will say, what a mistake. I always knew that they were really good and the Packers should have kept them and should have paid them. And we entirely allied the context in which those decisions were made. And we forget, like you do when you have a relationship that doesn't end well, and time passes, and eventually when you think back on that, you think you mostly remember the happy times. Not necessarily that you're wistful about it, but you're just like, yeah, I remember the good stuff. And I forget how toxic it was or whatever it is. That's what happens with these free agents sometimes. And it came because John Eric Sullivan said he felt like the biggest mistake that the Packers made while he was there, one of the best players he's ever been around was Micah Hyde, and they should have kept him. Well, okay, but he wasn't in Green Bay. He was not an elite player in Green Bay. He was a role player and an inconsistent one, and one where we didn't know what he was great at. He was the best punt returner they've had in 30 years. But they had Morgan Burnett and HaHa Clinton-Dix at safety, and he wasn't very clearly a boundary corner. He also really wasn't a slot corner the way we think of slot corners. And I think it would just be like a ridiculous hagiography to act like, oh no, he was this rising superstar and the Packers let him walk. That's not true. What we saw in Buffalo is not anywhere near the player we saw in Green Bay, and that's okay. I said at the time, I would not have given him the deal the Bills gave him. And that turned out to be wrong because of the player he turned into. But given what we had seen, I will always insist we did not have a reason to believe, nor did he have a path in Green Bay to being that guy that he eventually became in Buffalo. And good for him. And he made a lot of money and he became a really great player. And I'm genuinely very happy and was always happy for him to have that success. I blame Dom Capers for that. I don't blame Ted Thompson for that. The same way I don't blame Ted Thompson for Casey Hayward, I blame Dom Capers. They had Casey Hayward playing in a scheme that did not fit his skills. Casey Hayward, early in his career, breaks out, is terrific as a rookie, and then has injuries, never finds that consistency again, never finds that playmaker instinct again, and is playing miscast in a defense that does not fit him. And the Packers say, okay, it doesn't make sense. And he walks and he goes to a scheme that was perfect for what he does and ends up being, an all-pro. I remember it being written about in the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel at the time. I can't remember if it was Tom Silverstein or Bob McGinn or who it was, but one of those guys was like, look, he's not making impactful plays anymore. And there were injuries. Let's not rewrite history on this. I said at the time, the Bills did not offer very much money. And the Packers, according to Micah Hyde, basically offered nothing. Said, we don't think we can afford you. Good luck. But he ended up getting a 5-year $30 million deal. And I said at the time, I would not have done that. Again, clearly wrong. They should have swapped, said Micah, Clinton Dix, vaya con Dios, Micah Hyde, come please play the back end of our defense. They did not do that. But that is a failure of Dom Capers. It's hard for me to land that at the feet of the front office. They can only do with what the coaches allow them to do, and you only see what the coaches allow you to see. We think of the great play against the Cowboys in the playoffs and think that, well, that was Micah Hyde. Well, no, it wasn't. He created some big plays. He also had real problems with speed. He had real issues covering receivers, real issues playing as a deep middle and deep half safety at times for the Packers with what the Packers were asking him to do. He was solid and inconsistent. Casey Hayward at the end, solid, inconsistent, undersized. And so I don't want it to get lost to history. Like everyone thinks, like the Packers made this huge mistake in real time and these guys were going to go on to be all pros. No one thought that. No one thought that except, Hawkeye homers. Give me a break. Now, that's not to say that they weren't mistakes. They were. But also, you look back over the last, 25 years, not very many of those. Not very many of those. And those were also late career Ted Thompsons. Remember, they probably should have re-signed Julius Peppers too. That's a real one. Like, he was still really good and left and was really good for Carolina still. But that was late Ted Thompson when, his health was starting to fail him. Russ Ball was making more of those decisions, who's not a football guy necessarily. And he ended up, trying to learn more of the football side as Ted Thompson is deteriorating in health and all of those things. And so if you're going to have a criticism, it is that the Packers did not step in sooner to get a succession plan together. But 2016 happens that offseason. By 2018, Brian Gutekunst is in charge. So it's not like, they waited for years and years. And it was the 2015 draft that ultimately spelled the demise of Mike McCarthy. Ted Thompson takes the collar basically in 2015, and they cannot do anything with those guys. And it leaves you in a really bad position moving forward. You can't afford to have drafts like that. Does that mean the writing was on the wall then? Yeah, maybe. But I don't want the reason I bring this up now is, number one, John Eric Sullivan was quoted on our pal Kevin Clark's show about this. But if Quay Walker goes to Las Vegas and plays well, even if he plays relatively well, people are going to say the Packers never should have let him go, blah, blah, blah. Guys, he was not a good player for the Packers. And the money that they gave him did not make sense. I would so much rather have Zaire Franklin for half the cost annually than what Quay Walker got. It is just no contest. And so let's remember who they were in Green Bay at the time, because as time passes, we're only going to remember the good stuff. We're only going to remember the big plays. We're only going to remember that one play Micah Hyde made against the Cowboys, an incredible play. And we're going to forget the time, that he got beat across the field running in man coverage, or that he missed this tackle, or that he dropped the game-sealing interception against the 49ers in the playoffs. We'll just forget that part. We'll just forget that one. That one didn't count. No worries. Okay. That's not how it works. All right, back tomorrow. We got more goodies, guys, for you. I can't wait. I've been promising the running backs for too long. Let's get to the running backs. Mike Washington reportedly had a visit with the Packers. That's a name that I think we're going to need to know. I think there are running backs that the Packers are going to be willing to take. I think Mike Washington could be one of them. And so we're going to dig into that coming up here in the next couple of weeks. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you get podcasts. Follow me on the social medias wherever you have social media. If you're an everydayer, if you listen to us every day, why aren't you in the Everydayer Club? You get ad-free episodes of Locked On Packers, Plus, you get to be in the group chat with me and Locked On Packers listeners. So come hang out with us. LockedOnPackers.supercast.com is the link, or click the link in the show notes. For those of you on video, we send you to the first ever 24/7 national NFL YouTube channel. For those of you on audio, go make your second listen our Locked On Packers squad show or Locked On NFL Draft so you can stay Locked On Packers.